first question I want to ask has to do a little bit with the founding of Gumroad. So you founded in 2011, and I feel like around then, influencers, creators, personalities were definitely a big part of the online culture and ecosystem, but they were not at all really talked about or utilized in the way that they are today. So I want to ask, what did you see back then, even before other big companies in the space like Patreon or Substack were getting started? What did you see back then that you kind of identified as an opportunity and made you want to go all in on Gumroad?
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts to this. One was I wanted to solve my own problem. So I wanted to sell this pencil icon that I designed to my Twitter audience. And I didn't even have a website. I just had a few thousand people follow me on Twitter. So that was kind of step one, right? It was like, this is a problem that I need solved, which is kind of a new problem because most of the time if you have an audience, it means you already have a website, right? Like the order of operations was flipped for me. And then the next phase of that was like, there are probably a lot of people who are having this experience right now because the internet is making it much easier to build an audience on the internet without needing a website and figuring out, having a domain. So that was kind of like the insight I had was like, people are connecting directly with their audience. And the next phase of that for me was commerce, right? Like step one, you can talk to your fans. You don't need a record store or a radio to get in front of them. That's step one. Step two is like, well, why do you need the record label or radio store at all, right? So that was kind of the problem that I saw that I felt like was going to inevitably change because creators were just getting more and more powerful. Though at the time, the creator economy was not even a word. I actually looked up in Slack. I believe we're the first company to actually ever use the term creator economy. In 2015 is when we started using it. So even it took us, 3 or 4 years to kind of realize that this was like a really kind of a new, I don't know what you call it, but kind of a new economy, a new kind of use case that was different than maybe the influencer kind of word that people were mostly using, to describe these things back in the day.
So I'll just hop right into my next question about that. So, I was reading the article that you wrote about your experience with Gumroad, and something you said was that you had this all-star cast of angel investors. But I'm curious, on the note of you kind of identifying things before creator economy was really, something that people were catching on to at all. Was it really difficult to build that all-star cast of investors? I mean, how hard was it to sell them on your vision?
It was really easy, honestly. Yeah, I mean, most people were sold pretty early. I mean, the simple why now of, they're basically every human being is able to build an audience or going to be able to build an audience without any gatekeepers preventing them from doing so. The next step is this sort of deep unbundling of the storefront and the marketplace where people will be able to kind of sell on their own accord, at least at a high level. This is also like around when Bitcoin was first making waves. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin was around $1 at the time. So, a lot of people were talking about Bitcoin, decentralization and unbundling even in 2011. So, I think that helped as well. So it was, people generally, Chris Saka and Naval and some other folks, I think they got it. Even back then. Maybe they got it too much, right? It turned out maybe we're all a few years too early now with, because of COVID, I think, we're really seeing a big boost in the creator economy. It's now kind of becoming a word or a term, but it's still insanely early.
So on that note, I would like to hear you talk a little bit about how Gumroad differs from services like Patreon, Coffee, Substack, stuff like that, other kind of companies that are emerging in the or already established in the creator economy space.
Yeah. I mean, we're first, so that is nice, but who cares, right? I think, we just really try to prioritize the creator. I think the crowdfunding round that we did was, in that vein of like, how do we get creators equity in the company itself? Well, how can they participate in the financial upside of this business working or not? So I think that's just philosophically like very different, right? Substack just raised $65 million at a $650 million valuation. We raised $6 million at a $100 million valuation from our customers and our community. I think it's just a very different sort of way of thinking about the creator economy. I don't think Substack really even considers themselves in the creator economy. They're just about newsletters, mostly going around, after kind of journalists and these sort of these papers, I think. But I think it would be great, but they're really expensive. I think they're really focused on kind of being this all-in-one solution. I think Gumroad, we don't care as much about do we want to be massive? It's more about, can we just build a really great extensible product that's affordable? We're also just way cheaper than Substack and Patreon. We're at least half as cheap as both of those platforms are, and we're profitable. That's another big thing that a lot of these companies can't really say. They're generally losing money, which, if you're a creator, you want to be a little careful, I think, or at least cautious with, who you support, who you build your own business on top of, right? So,
you talked a little bit about the philosophical difference between, how you all started and how you fund yourselves versus something like Substack. That was something I found really compelling when you wrote your story about the history of Gumroad. How you left Pinterest before your 1-year cliff, so you had no payout. You said that was a decision you maybe wouldn't make again. I just think it's really interesting because it reminded me almost immediately of the story that a lot of creators who jump to platforms like Gumroad tell. Quit your job today and pursue your passions. So I just kind of wanted to hear you talk about that a little bit, about whether or not you see that comparison, if it helps you think differently about Gumroad's role in the creator economy and how it services its creators, things like that.
Yeah, totally. I do think it plays a role. I mean, I like to think of Gumroad as a creator economy company built by creators for other creators. We hire a lot of our head of product, our head of community, we hire our top Gumroad creators to basically run chunks of the organization, because my belief is that they should be able to decide, and they are probably better positioned, honestly, in cases, to make decisions on what we should be building, what we should be prioritizing. And I'd say I'm not trying to be, as I mentioned in that post, I'm not trying to be like a Steve Jobsian visionary, right? Where I think some of these other companies, just by the nature of the beast, if you raise a bunch of capital and you're trying to really build a $5-10 billion company, you have to kind of predict the future in a sense, or you have to kind of make these bets. And my thing is I'm just going to build the best product. I'm just going to talk to creators, make our product better. I'm going to try to be pretty low ego about it. And I think that's what creators want. I don't think they want someone to come in and say, hey, we've solved all your problems. It costs 10-15%, but you get all of these things, and we're adding all these features all the time. It's a lot of creators just want the simple stuff to do what it does, and they don't want it to get more expensive. And I just think generally a lot of these platforms, they start where Gumroad starts, and then they basically go up market, because that's where all the revenue is, right? Substack inevitably will support larger and larger publications over time, and things like that. Gumroad, I think, just philosophically, we want to be the on-ramp to the creator economy. We want to help people quit their jobs. If they use Gumroad, it helps them succeed, and then they decide they want to go use Teachable or Patreon or something else because they need some certain functionality, or they piece together their own solution with Stripe and MailChimp and all these other tools or whatever. They're welcome to do that. And I think I just try to take myself not too seriously about it. When you wake up and you're oh, Substack just raised 65, it's 650. We're bigger than Substack, by the way. We do far more revenue and volume than Substack or Cameo. We do more volume than Cameo does. Obviously, we're not growing as fast. But sometimes it's maybe I should get back on that path. But I just try to remind myself that look, the creator economy is not about making gazillions of dollars. In my view, the creator economy is about quitting your job. And it just seems kind of ironic to me, and certainly was ironic even at the time, of we're a creator economy company. We try to, we try to say that we want to make it more possible for people to quit their jobs, but the way we do that is basically hiring people and making them work 60 hours a week. Seems a little weird, right? So I just think I just really want to kind of eat my own dog food and say, can we build a company in this really weird way where we don't have meetings and schedules and deadlines, and we just hire a bunch of, dozens, if not hundreds of creators to just kind of chip in, and everyone gets paid, obviously. But it's just a very, very different approach. It feels to me more like a crypto kind of philosophy. On that, I think a lot of VCs will say you're wrong. You can't. Sorry, like you're going to die. Like Patreon or Substack or somebody else will come in and this is a winner take all market and one of you is going to win. Or I just don't buy that. I think the creator economy is absolutely massive, and I just don't. I think Gumroad's going to be a great business. Substack's going to be a great business. Patreon's going to be a great business. Like, I don't think people. The other thing I'd like to say is like the platform that wins, if there is a winner, is not going to be, I think, purely about pricing or functionality. It's going to be about like creator consensus, like what platform do they want to support, and it's kind of like lift for super kind of thing. And I think a lot of creators will pick the platform that feels more aligned with them philosophically. So my kind of like long-term macro bet is that like over time, Patreon, Substack, Gumroad will all roughly have the same functionality, allow you to do similar things, just like Shopify and Squarespace and Webflow basically offer this rough same functionality, but depending on who you are, what you care about, like choose one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's refreshing to hear you talk about it this way. I'm so used to interviewing founders who talk about like the typical kind of venture-backed company metrics for success, like rapid, nonstop growth, being the one winner in the space to kind of push out all others. It's what you're saying is so different from what I am used to hearing covering companies in this space.
Well, it's funny because I run a venture fund, so I write checks to startups, and so it's kind of ironic. I'm not opposed to that way of thinking necessarily, but I think for me personally, and maybe this is just me being selfish, like I just don't think I need to work 60 hours a week anymore. I had a level of confidence. Gumroad's now over $12 million in annualized revenue, processing close to $200 million a year annualized, like bigger than Cameo, bigger than Substack. So I don't say that to brag or whatever, but just to be like, I do have a level of confidence that I did something correctly, and I'm pretty good at what I do, which I think means that I don't have to play like crowdfunding, for example, right? Like I think a lot of people would not have the confidence to crowdfund their company around, right? Mm-hmm. At a $100 million valuation, I get emails from VCs all the time. They're like, hey, do you want to raise more money? Obviously the market is pretty crazy right now, and if you're a creator economy company, you're probably getting term sheets left and right. I just have to say, look, like, if you really please do the research on the way that I run Gumroad, and then come back to me if this is something that you would want to fund. And so far, every single person says, I'm super interested, love Gumroad, watch the board meeting, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, go read this article about how we have no full-time employees and I don't have deadlines. And every time it's like, okay, yeah, we don't really want to give you $30 million if that's your approach to running the company. And I'm like, well, there's a reason I'm very open, mm-hmm. Saves everyone time.
So I want to pivot a little bit to something that you said recently on a Clubhouse room, and it was no, it's it's nothing awful. It was just something that really caught my interest. You said that I think the quote that was like it's easy to get caught up in millions of followers, but 400 followers is an insane amount of people. You'd fly to another city to speak at an event with 400 people. 400 people subscribing to your newsletter for $10 a month is a living for almost anybody in the world. That really changed the way that I think about the creator economy. I mean, I spend a lot of time covering and engaging with online communities. And I feel like on platforms like YouTube, Twitch, etc., there's such an accepted belief that you need to have this massive growing, constantly growing audience, not that different from, I guess, a venture-backed company, in order to ever make a reasonable living off of that platform. So I have kind of two questions on that front. So the first one is, I'd just like to hear you talk about whether it's become easier or harder, or how it's changed over time to be able to monetize a hobby or a craft with a smaller audience like 400. Is that something that Gumroad uniquely enables, or is it something that you think has just kind of evolved over time as the creator economy has evolved?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think certainly Gumroad and other platforms have made it easier. But I do think the larger shift is that consumers are used to this way of supporting creators now, right? More than they have been in the past. If you asked a creator or somebody how they supported a YouTuber, for example, 10 years ago, they would have said, basically, I watch your videos, which they make ad revenue on. But now today, I think it's much more complicated and complex. You can support people through a membership, a newsletter. You could give them money for digital products. You can do the other stuff that you've been able to do for a long time. You can join their community. Some of these people will have these exclusive communities you can pay for. The online courses, I think, is going to be absolutely massive. I think the nice thing about COVID is just like it kind of really forced people to figure that out. Like, what is the online version of the offline? And it turns out not too different. But the other thing I'd say is like it's still very difficult, right? Like, it sounds easy to maybe have 400 people follow you on the internet because people are so used to these massive follower accounts. And I think one of the issues with how easy it's become to get started and have a Twitter account, have a Clubhouse account, start contributing, which I think is all great. I don't think we should make it any harder. We should continue to make it easier. But I think it makes people think that it's easy, if that makes sense, right? Like it's easier. It doesn't mean it's easy. Like the technical burden is easier. The cost is zero, but you still have to become like a really good writer. And that doesn't happen overnight, right? And so that part, I think, is sometimes lost on people where they think, oh, just because I can build an audience on the internet means that I will. But it's like, no, you still have to spend years getting good at your skill. It doesn't go away. You still need the thousands of hours of painting or writing or art of any sort to get good at a skill. And I think that sometimes gets lost.
To use your 400 follower example, because you could have 400 followers, but really only have 100 or fewer of those followers be kind of activated and actively engaging with your content. So is there a way that you've seen or that you suggest that that creators can kind of activate their following? If they have 1,000 followers on Twitter, how to really get the most out of that audience? Like, how does somebody judge whether their platform is actually big enough to go independent via a service like Gumroad?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to like the fidelity of those relationships. Generally, creators have a pretty good sense, though. Like, if you're engaging with your audience back and forth, if you have conversations with them on multiple modals, right, modalities like Clubhouse, Twitter. If you send an email and 300 people, and like 80% of them read the email every week, like, I think you have pretty good. It's kind of like product market fit, right? Like, you have a pretty good sense of like if you're actually solving the problem that your audience has, which is what you're doing, right? Even if you're a creator and not a business owner necessarily, like generally, like your art or your educational content or what have you is solving a problem, a job to be done, I guess, for the audience, right? Like, and so that I think a lot of creators will know. I think the other thing to point out is like. It's unlikely. What we see is not like you have 100 people paying you $10 a month. It's often an 80-20 kind of thing where you have 80 people paying you $10 a month, and then you have like 10 people paying you $50 a month, and you have one person paying you $300 a month or $1,000 a month, because it's like your super fan who like wants to like sit down with you and have a Zoom call 1 hour a week, And so that's often what we see is like it's not purely. Even these people who run these newsletters, like a lot of the way they monetize is like 1% of their audience are VCs and they consult for them, like it's often like lead gen for consulting businesses or contracting businesses, et cetera. So I think it's helpful for people to think about multiple revenue streams, not just like it's very pure to say I'm going to have 1,000 people paying me $1 a month or $2 a month or $5 a month. But the truth is like if you look at a Kickstarter project, if you look at obviously I can see the Gumroad data, but if you look at virtually everything, every creator, Hunter Wall calls these multi-SKU creators, right? But like generally there's like a first class ticket, a business class ticket, and an economy ticket, right? And those things scale because your audience is not all at the same income level, right?
Do you think it's the role of a company like Gumroad to provide tools to help build and develop that audience? Or is it more of a situation where that creator, like you said earlier, develops their skill, develops their audience, and then jumps to a platform like Gumroad? Like, how does the interaction between platform and creator, at least for your company, work?
Honestly, like it's funny, like people are pretty split on this. Like a lot of creators, especially the ones who are just getting started or thinking about getting started, they are like, hey, does Gumroad help with distribution? Like, will you give me sales? Or, I'm an amazing writer, but I don't have an audience. To be honest, I'm always a little skeptical of those people because, it's not that hard to have an audience. And if you're a really great writer, you should have some people who want to read that stuff, right? How do you even know if you are a really great writer? I also worry because generally the people who really like doing something are doing it already. And so when people are like waiting for the panacea, it often means that they actually don't want to do the hard work of like learning the skill. Like, so that's just, that's kind of a side note. I think generally most creators don't actually want Gumroad to participate in the discovery. Like, they don't mind us doing stuff like recommendations. Around 5% of our volume is like referrals. So we kind of like, you buy a product from Gumroad, we can like, help you find more products that are similar or what have you. And we'll do more of that in the coming years. But I don't think we'll ever pitch it as like, we're like Amazon or something, right? Where like you kind of, and then the reason is like, I just think we don't want to become the new middleman, right? Like, we don't want to replace the record label with Gumroad necessarily. Like, we kind of want to get out of the way. And I think the top creators know that. Like, they don't want Gumroad to be in charge of that. And they also know that the economics are very different, right? If we start to drive more and more traffic, that gives us leverage and we can charge more money. So I always think it's healthy for a creator to have their own audience, to be able to communicate with them directly.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how the role of platforms will develop as the creator economy grows. Like, how will the role of the platform function in this ecosystem over the next 10 years?
A big thing that we do probably in the next 5 to 10 years is get into financial services. Help creators, start up outlets, right? Like, help creators spin up LLCs, help them split payouts with their bandmates. I think the difficulty with it is you just need a lot of scale, right? Like, you need to be processing around $1 billion in GMV is what I've heard, for it to be really worth it to have these incremental, revenue streams, et cetera. We might help people pay taxes, or, there are a lot of things that we could get into, I think, accounting services for creators, et cetera. However, we're still very small, right? I think that's the thing I always tell people starting creator economy companies is just so you know, you need a lot of creators. Like, Gumroad has roughly as many creators using the product as Shopify did when they IPO'd.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it a 40x difference in multiple? Well, because the LTV is totally different, the GMV that each business is processing. But we roughly have the same. So that's kind of crazy. I think people don't really realize that. Gumroad had roughly as many customers, maybe more customers than Stripe back in the day. It's just the kind of customers that use Stripe, very different from the kind of customers that use Gumroad, and that very fundamentally impacts your growth, right? Because that's all you are as a platform, is just the growth of your customers.
I did an interview recently with Austin Reef, who's the co-founder of Morning Brew, and he had a lot of interesting things to say about the creator economy. And one of the questions I asked him was, how does Morning Brew prevent itself from eventually running into a situation that a lot of legacy media places are now, where they have a very prominent, popular writer, for example, who decides, I have a big enough audience to go to Substack and start my own newsletter. I don't need the New York Times or Vox or anything anymore. And he said that the company needs to create this really intense flywheel of, we offer you editors, we offer you different ways to monetize, all these things to keep somebody, to make Morning Brew an appealing place for a creator to stay. And I wanted to ask you about the flip side of that equation. Is it Gumroad's, I guess broader, do you think the goal of companies in the creator economy to pull those people away through things like sales and marketing? And then how do you see the role of Gumroad? Because you've talked a little bit about how you want it to be self-serving.
Yeah. I think Gumroad's goal is we want to provide a really, really great set of software that creators can choose to use to basically get leverage over the traditional media or the traditional industries, the traditional pipeline that they're in, right? And that's we want to be able to do that affordably, profitably, sustainably. I think Substack and I think because they're on that path of they're trying to build at this point, they need to be for this to be a success for Andreessen and their new round, they probably have to be a multi-billion-dollar company, and that's just going to require them. Just the market's not big enough yet for them. They're going to have to pull people away from other outlets. But what I will add is and to sort of Austin's point, the truth is most people don't want to be part of the creator economy, and I don't know if that will ever really change.
like most people I talk to on a daily basis outside of my job are very happy getting paid a salary and getting a W-2 and getting healthcare and benefits and, having editors look over everything and blah, 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 right? Like, I think, like, you talk to most musicians, like, yes, there are a bunch, and it's great that you can do this stuff independently now, but the vast majority of musicians want to sign with the label. They want to get a manager. They want to go because they want to have someone who's done it before help them do it, right? So I think the way that I think about Gumroad is just like, I want to make it easier and easier for people to choose to go independent, but I understand that, like, no matter how easy we make it, there are other cognitive burdens and cognitive overhead and friction that means most people will never do it. Like, most people will never start a company, right? No matter how easy you can make it, most people will probably just never do that. I hope that is untrue. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe 50, 100 years from now, like, it'll be easier and easier and easier and easier. But, like, yeah, when I talk to most people, like, they're like, it's amazing. Like, I can't imagine working for somebody. I worked for Pinterest for like 8 months, and that's the only job I've ever really had and probably will ever have. So I just can't fathom, like, working 9 to 5. But most of my friends can't.
Are there any people that you follow or read that are doing interesting things that you think are worth checking out? Like, what is someone doing right now out there, whether it's in VC or a creator on Twitter, on Clubhouse, that has really, like, captivated your interest? I'm curious to know.
Like, nowadays, what I'm really interested in is, like, regulation. Like, I actually think, like, the technology, for example, like, the number one thing holding back the creator economy is not better software. The software is pretty darn good and has been for quite a while. I think it's, like, the fact that you don't get healthcare, so I don't know, like, maybe it's just because I'm getting older, or, like, I'm getting more philosophical or whatever, or I'm just bored of talking about software or something, but I end up thinking a lot about, like, I'm talking to people in Congress about, like, what can we do to change these SEC rules and these accreditation laws? Because I think the truth, like, the tech is pretty well built. So now that I have this kind of new audience and new buzz around this crowdfunding stuff, like, that's really what I'm trying to spend a lot of my time is, like, can I help push through anything that may make it easier for people to invest in startups or, people to get healthcare, or, like, I think that is worth spending a lot of my time on, personally.
Yeah. Do you think that the number of people who would make the jump to, becoming an independent creator would greatly change if something like Medicare for All got passed?
Oh yeah, I really think so. I mean, I think it would be like COVID in March. Like, COVID in March for us was like, we went from 5,000 people selling products per day to 7,000 people within a week. Because of the New York and California lockdowns. So, like, if you think about just, like, the macro shift, it's like we took 8 years to get to 5,000 and a week to get to 7,000. Like, pretty insane. But I think that, yeah, so that just makes me, like, hyper aware of, like, what macro shifts can really do for Gumroad. That's, like, far beyond anything that I could do personally or anything we could ship necessarily. Like, we're roughly, we're shipping features, but there's nothing, obviously people use the product, right? So it has the things that it needs. But yeah, I think there's two things. There's two things that would massively accelerate the creator economy. One is healthcare. I think that would be like a 2x kind of thing. It would like, I just know so many people, and not just creator economy, but people starting companies. And I think there's a lot of other avenues, that would be more explored in the US. But then the other thing is the app stores. So currently, Google and Apple take 30% of all digital content on their stores, which is, by the way, like how most people consume content these days, right? So you're basically, like, currently, basically, if you want to sell, like, if you think about Substack, Patreon, etc., like, none of these have apps, right? Like, but they do technically. We do all have apps, but no one thinks about the apps when they think about these platforms. Mm-hmm. But, like, imagine if you did. Like, imagine if you opened Substack, like you opened Reddit. But the reason that will never happen, or that has not happened yet, is because we can't give 30%. We take 10% or 5%. How can we give 30% to Apple, right? So I think if, like, regulatorily, like, in terms of, like, I've been talking mostly about deregulation around the crowdfunding stuff, like allowing more people to do it. But I think in this case, like, more regulation, like getting Google and Apple to to say, sorry, you can't take 30% of this, like, of an economy. Like, that's a 30% tax.
Yeah.
On the creator economy. It's absolutely, and now it's 15, blah, 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 whatever, but it's massive. It's preventative. It's like, I really believe, like, if that was different, Gumroad would, not just Gumroad, Substack, Patreon, like, these, frankly, Patreon, like, Substack would have been too late. I really think, like, that would 10x the creator economy. Like, that would be really, really, really game changing, because, like, if you think about my competition at Gumroad is not even these other creator economy companies. It's like Netflix and Amazon. And why are these platforms, why do these win? It's because the convenience for the user is so much better.
Well, maybe that 30% thing is about to change with this lawsuit going on between Epic Games and Apple.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think it is inevitable, to be honest. It's either inevitable in terms of, like, people will figure, I just really believe the economic sort of stimulus that would happen because of it. Like, there's just too many people want it to happen on both sides. Creators want it, consumers want it. Everyone except Apple basically wants it, right? I mean, they're the only winners in this game, Apple and Google. And so we'll see. I mean, I'm not hopeful, to be honest, because, these things don't come easy. But if I could wave a magic wand, if I could sort of make one thing true, that's what I would do, actually. So I'd probably just say, hey, Apple and Google, you can still take your, whatever they take on physical stuff, like Apple Pay, et cetera. Like, you can take your 2%, 3%, but, like, please stop. Like, even 5%, whatever. Like, we can negotiate, but, like, it would be massive. I really think it would be pretty game changing. I mean, I'll also say this, like, one of the things that I really have taken away from my journey has been, like, just not going away. Like, I started Gumroad in 2011. It took until, 2020, really, until, like, the creator economy was, like, a buzzword in any real capacity. And I would still argue, like, if you Google Trends creator economy, it's like zero, right? Like, it's maybe a tech. It's very, very, very new. Like, most people don't know what Gumroad is. Most people, frankly, don't even know what Substack is or Patreon. It's still very early, I think, in terms of 7 billion people on Earth. And so that's, like, I hope, like, I believe at some point in the next 50 years, like, that 30% is changing. I hope. And so I will be around. I plan to run Gumroad or have, I don't never plan to sell the business to anybody except the public. And so, because I know that, like, look, I'm glad that I didn't give up. And so, like, that's a big, really important thing for me, is the sustainability of the business. And, like, I believe that if we just don't stop what we're doing, and we just stick around, eventually, like, a lot of these macro shifts will happen, just like COVID happened. I always, like, try to remind myself that the goal here is just basically to stay in the game. And I think as long as we do that, like, one day I'll wake up and, like, there'll be some crazy ruling, and then Gumroad's going to do a lot better.